are we seeing any negative impacts at this moment on brain activity, cognitive function with our older folks who are more out of shape than ever before?
Yeah, not just our older folks, our kids. Excess body mass, excess adiposity is probably a better way to put it. And in particular, visceral adiposity, more than just subcutaneous adiposity, is related to changes in brain function and changes in cognitive and academic outcomes.
Wow.
So I mean, we do know that there are other health factors besides just being more fit. Carrying excess body mass is also a problem.
We believe that you are strong by design, and you were made in God's image to have a strong body, mind, and spirit. You're listening to the #1 strength and health authority podcast in the world. So let's get ready to unlock your potential and transform your life in today's episode.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Strong by Design podcast. Hosting today, Coach Chris Wilson. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining the show. If you're a first-time listener of the show, we welcome you and encourage you to come back every week or two when we release a new episode. And we have literally hundreds of episodes for you to go back and listen to. The show has been live now for over 7 years, and it's still fun for me. Still, it's amazing how we continue to find extraordinary guests and just to keep the conversation going about all things strong by design. And if you're a return listener, we welcome you back. Thank you for supporting the show. If you haven't already, hit 5 stars and leave us a review. We'd love to hear about your experience with the show, past guests that you've enjoyed, past conversations. Or let me know what you truly think about me. That would be fine too. Any feedback is welcome. So thank you so much. So excited for our guest today, Dr. Charles Hillman, or Chuck, as I will be referring to him for the rest of the show. But I want to set him up properly because he came on the scene for me several months ago when I was doing research for a TEDx talk I ended up doing up in New Albany, Ohio. And he was kind enough to say yes to me using an old circulating brain scan image that he produced a long time back. And so I reached out, and he was very courteous and quick to get back to me. And I just thought, you know what? He would be just such a great guest for the podcast because I love talking about all things brain-related. Dr. Charles Hillman is a well-respected researcher in the fields of cognitive neuroscience, exercise science, neurocognitive kinesiology. His work is primarily exploring the relationship between physical activity, brain function, and cognitive function, cognitive performance, especially in children and older adults. He's formerly at the University of Illinois, where he co-directed the Body and Brain Lab, and is currently a professor at Northeastern University. You can see his wonderful backdrop there up in the Boston area. And he's known for using neuroimaging techniques like EFG and MRI to study how exercise influences brain structure and function. And one of his landmark studies showed that physically fit children have a bigger hippocampal volume and perform better on memory and tasks, on memory tasks. So, just an honor to have him here today based on the work I've been doing privately and just learning everything I can kind of get my hands on when it comes to movement and its impact on our brain. And so, Dr. Hillman, or Chuck, thank you so much for joining us on Strong by Design today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
This is great. It's a long time coming for me because we corresponded a few months ago, and I've just been waiting for the opportunity. So I just so grateful for you. And I want to know what first captured your interest in the brain and how movement of the body impacts our brains and our cognitive function, because that's obviously kind of a specialty. It's not something you just happen into. I'm sure there was some moves that you made in your early part of your career to kind of get you into this path. So if you could maybe talk about that a bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you taking the time to have me on today. Um, I'll keep it brief because like a lot of us in our early 20s, we're just kind of chasing things that make us excited, right, and motivated. And so, at the time, I did my undergrad at the University of Miami, go Canes, and we, there I was a psych major, and like a lot of people, I started out biology pre-med and took one class. It's like, no way, I have no interest in this. And, happened along, found psychobiology and I thought, wow, this is awesome. And went back and had to take Psych 101, kind of your classic intro to psychology. And I was like, oh no, this is terrible. And I didn't know where I was going. And so along the way, my father, funny enough, was a Harvard professor and studied completely different area, molecular genetics. And got tired of Boston winters, went up to University of Florida, and ended up at UF in the summer working with someone he had met. Sorry, I was just closing out my email there so it doesn't ding. And this guy, his name is Peter Lang. He studied fear and anxiety. And, coming out of like the psychobiology interest, what really captured me is that he wasn't just, asking people how scared they were or what made them fearful. He was actually measuring the brain using EEG, and he was measuring facial physiology, looking at like the startle reflex and your smiling muscles, the zygomatic muscles, and your frowning muscles, your corrugator muscles, and actually measuring, and then a whole host of other measures. And he was measuring the body and the body's response to being emotional, be it positive or negative or neutral. And so I did that for a while. I went back to Miami. I graduated. He offered me a post-bac job as a lab tech. I went up there, and I always thought I was going to be a clinical psychologist. But I was really getting into this fear and anxiety stuff. But at the end of the day, I would bust out of work as soon as I was done for the day, and I'd go hit the gym, hit the basketball court. I was playing softball leagues. So I was just a really active guy. I grew up a good athlete. I played a lot of sports in high school, and I still, play hockey 3 days a week and ride my mountain bike and do all that stuff. So it was just very important to me, still lift weights even in my 50s. And so what happened is along the way, I met another one of my dad's friends, this guy, Bob Singer. Bob Singer was probably one of the most prolific sports psychologists of his generation. And this is a guy who, like, during the Cold War was giving lectures in Cuba, a really amazing guy. And he basically looked at me and said, like, what the hell do you want to go be a clinical psychologist for? He's like, you want to be a sports psychologist. That's a thing? Like, are you kidding? And so I literally stopped submitting my applications to clinical programs. I had gotten a few of them in, but like just stopped on right then and there and submitted to University of Florida's exercise science department. And between the two of them, Bob Singer and another guy named Jim Kura, who ended up being my mentor, and then Peter Lang and another guy named Bruce Cuthbert, they kind of worked in teams there. I got to study the psychophysiology of sport. And in that day, we fit it into emotion. So my first work was on the psychology of sports fans. And actually, I'll have to dig for a minute while I talk here. But actually, here you go. I ended up on the cover of Sports Illustrated for my master's thesis. And so, after a couple of years of that, I kind of decided I wanted more of a public health spin to my work. Studying sports fans was fun, but that wasn't the public health piece I needed. And I ended up at University of Maryland working under a guy named Brad Hatfield, one of the first guys to introduce EEG into the field of sports psychology. And so his piece was that he studied performance. He was interested in elite marksmen. Good Canadian boy, had no interest in firing a gun, and probably I don't think he ever had. But marksmen have to hold very still to shoot, and they literally shoot between heartbeats and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a perfect model to study the brain, where you can't have a lot in that day. You couldn't have your head sloshing around a lot. And so he was talking about attention states and sustained attention, all these things that we need in sports. and showing differences between expert and novice and elite and super elite marksmen. And so I took that and that experience, and he had a pet area that I really developed, which was physical activity effects on the aging brain. And so I used all those tools and all that experience I got, but was really interested in this public health piece of going after, what's it mean for the average person? Is physical activity, we know it's good for the heart, we know it's good for the muscles, we know it's good for the lungs, but is it good for the brain? And so that was my first project in older adults. And I got an NIH fellowship along the way, as a student, and that allowed me to take a job at the University of Illinois. And my lab there, which was the neurocognitive kinesiology lab, developed a program research in physical activity effects on brain. What was interesting about that was that those are the real formative years of that field, and we were all at Illinois. So separate from me, there was a guy named Art Kramer who was doing this in older adults, along with another guy named Eddie McCauley, who to this day is they're both dear friends of mine and good colleagues. And I kind of had a different interest, and so I had you had the three of us, and there's another half dozen people all studying this area at Illinois all at the same time. But I was the only one who kind of gained this interest in chasing after early intervention. And so I got interested in kids.
Wow. And this is late 90s, early 2000s?
This is, yeah. So I took my first job at Illinois in 2000.
Wow.
And so, this idea that, I thought it was so cool to see how you have the brain is in the state of decay with age. Healthy decay, but decay nonetheless. Yeah. But, you could exercise and you'd see differences in structure and function of the brain. But it always bothered me. I just never understood why we waited till someone was 60, 65 years old to tell them, hey, this is good for your brain. And so on a whim, and I remember the moment where I actually had this thought, I said, okay, let's go ahead and see if this works in children, and set out to study, at the time, 7 to 12-year-olds. And we've since, we've honed in a little bit onto the 8 to 10-year-old range, but, and ran that first study. And the effects were huge in kids, high fit kids versus low fit kids. And I've never looked back since. So that's kind of my story. Wow.
It is fascinating. For me, a guy who's loved exercise and activity and sports and athletics and you name it, if it was movement of the body and competitive in nature, I wanted to be part of it. And I didn't really care what it was. It's funny, as a little kid, what you can turn into a game. Right. And everything's a game, right? We had Kill the Carrier, which is throw a ball up in the air. Whoever catches it just has to run around like a crazy person, and a gaggle of other boys just go and tackle you. And that was basically all of the 1980s for me. It was like...
Yeah, I think we called that Kill them out of the ball. We weren't even that creative. Yeah.
And then, I had two older brothers, so I always had somebody, and plenty of neighborhood friends. There was always physical activity, and the body in motion was just part of my life. And I've always just had a love for it. And it always made sense to me as I got into the fitness and health space and was working with largely older clientele, that it had a very real impact on our mental state. Not just how we thought about things, but how we our mood and our motivations in life, and all of these things, along with memory and things that were really tangible. Like you could really see the impact and the effects of movement on the body. I saw it with my own mother, who was dealing with her own bouts with cancer, and she knew exercise was a good way to kind of recover and get past some of these health scares that she had. And I just saw how positively it was affecting her. And so everything that you just said, I love it. What can you say more specifically maybe about how well our brain ages based on our activity as children? So if we're highly active as kids, from say 3 to 15 or 3 to 18 or even take your 7 to 12, and then you extrapolate that out to what that same person looks like at 70s and 80s, are they going to have noticeably different brain activity or different cognitive abilities over someone who is inactive in those years?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Chris. I mean, the easy answer for me to say to you is we don't know, right? I mean, no
Okay.
one's done the research to follow people, right, over the course of a
That
lifespan.
long, yeah.
However, my inclination is to say no, that no, it won't benefit you. But with a caveat, right? So, I mean, I think the brain is like any other muscle. I mean, if you bench heavy and build your chest out in your teenage years into your early 20s, and and you're really producing a lot of testosterone and going after it, and you don't do it again after the age of 25, what's your chest look like at 70, right?
Right.
It's a use it or lose it thing. And I think the brain is the same way. But having said that, there is a theory in the field called, brain reserve or cognitive reserve. And the idea is that, you build up your baseline, your reserve early in life. And that when you fall later in life, even if you're falling the same amount, you started at a higher level, right? And so I think it is really easy to see, as you said, what it looks like in aging when people move.
Right.
My parents are a great example. Divorced for many years. My mom was never an exerciser. She, in her 70s, she exercises, I don't know, Zumba, whatever, older women do. That kind of thing.
Zumba. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, that kind of thing, right?
Sure.
Not really pushing herself, right? My dad, he runs 5 miles or bikes 5 miles to the gym, works out or does, Tai Chi, and then bikes or runs home, right?
Wow.
He's cutting down trees in his yard. He lives out, on a couple acres in Florida. He's just active. And when you look at him, they're both the same age. They're both 76. When you look at my father, I mean, he's standing upright. He's muscular. He moves, he'll tell you everything that hurts him, right? This hurts, that hurts, whatever. But, this is a guy who played golf till he was 74 years old. I mean, like he kayaks, he hikes, he does all these things, all these ways. And he just doesn't look like your average 76-year-old guy,
Yep.
It's,
Wow.
and I think, we know this, right? I mean, we know that exercise throughout the course of our lives builds that reserve, our physical reserve in that case, right?
Certainly.
And I think that extends to brain. There's no question.
100%. And yeah, and that's, so I totally get it. The use it or lose it kind of approach. It's a simple way of saying, it's like, it doesn't matter what you did X amount of years ago. If you stop doing it, the benefits are very hard to see years later, decades later. However, if you're fairly active, above average for much of your life, for decades of your life, and then maybe you have a period of health issue or health scare or whatever, a setback of some kind, I think it's easier to get back into the shape or, physically to get back kind of to where you were. Right. Versus having maybe not done anything for decades and then kind of starting from zero later in life. I know it's very hard for a lifelong sedentary person, to all of a sudden make great gains. But the body is pretty amazing what it can do if you just give it a little something.
And the brain too, right? In the sense that if you think about, those of us who are active above average throughout our lives have a motivation for that. It's important to us, right? I mean, if we're giving up things in our life, the number one reason why people don't exercise is because of lack of time. Well, I'm sure you're a busy guy. I'm a busy guy. There are other things I give up before my exercise, right?
That's right.
And so, I've had to be sedentary at times in my life, at least partially, right? I play a lot of ice hockey. I've had a couple surgeries, things like that. And yeah, it's hard coming back, but I push myself till I do, right?
Yeah.
Back skating again, back lifting again, doing those things because there's just a motivation or priority I place on it.
Yeah. I mean, for somebody that's, trained for many years with weights and, sure, I've experienced some discomfort or pain in certain parts of my body, but luckily nothing that's really holding me back or that's, chronically a huge issue. But we're going to feel like that kind of regardless. So we can either be in a little bit of pain and highly active, or we can be in a little bit or a lot of pain and be inactive. Either way, it's kind of just a choice at the end of the day.
Yeah.
What's most important? Do we want to set ourselves up for independence and the ability to be capable physical beings, or do we want to just let ourselves succumb to older age and become dependent on others?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and remember, there's places you don't want to be in old age, right? I mean, for the really feeble older adults, the ones who've never touched a weight or never done resistance exercise, a doctor will prescribe the soup can workout, right? And if I ever find myself in a position where, all I can do is lift Campbell's soup cans, I know I've failed somewhere, right?
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I feel the same way, very much so. I want to be I'm not that old yet. I'm scratching 50 here soon, but I like to feel like if I can be inspiring to younger people who say, hey, well, that guy moves pretty good for a guy who's about 50, and I hope I can still have that same approach to my life 10 years from now, even 20 years from now, as long as, every year you're going to have a drop off, right? You're going to have a 1% drop off or 2% drop off, but it doesn't mean you can't, maximize what you have,
Yeah, I think I agree completely. But I think one of the things we need to remember is that you and I are the outliers, right?
Yeah.
The vast majority of the world does not meet the physical activity guidelines, right? And so, being less active or sedentary appears to be the norm.
Yeah.
And so there's something about the brains of those folks or their response or their feelings towards exercise that if we knew how to cure that would be, that's the $1 million question, right?
Yeah, 100% it is. In fact, I had written something down here previously is that I said it was so much of our population being overweight and being obese. It seems like every year or 5 years, it seems like the numbers are just worse and worse. Are we seeing any negative impacts at this moment on brain activity, cognitive function with our older folks who are more out of shape than ever before?
Yeah, not just our older folks, our kids. We have a lot of research out of my lab that I've collaborated with a former student, postdoc of mine, Warren Rain, who's now a professor here. I have a colleague who's back at Illinois in that body. I can't remember the name of the lab is, but Naman Khan, he's one of the co-director of that lab. But and he's a nutritional neuroscientist. And, we've basically shown that, excess body mass, excess adiposity is probably a better way to put it. And in particular, visceral adiposity, more than just subcutaneous adiposity, is related to changes in brain function and changes in cognitive and academic outcomes.
Wow.
So we do know that there are other health factors besides just being more fit, carrying excess body mass is also a problem.
Yeah. And for those listening, visceral adiposity, I think I'm saying it right.
Yep.
Adipose tissue, adiposity. Visceral is the fat surrounding our organs, correct? The deeper level of fat.
In our visceral cavity, right?
Yep.
In
the belly, in the abdomen. Yeah.
Abdomen.
Subcutaneous being kind of just like the fat that's at the surface level. Yeah. So yeah, it is fascinating to me. Well, in the land of abundance, it is harder and harder to have a caloric deficit in our lives, or on the flip side of that, besides cutting the caloric intake, is raising the activity level up to where you're burning so many calories that what you're eating doesn't really hold you back, which is kind of the benefit of being young. Is like typically when you're younger, not all, but like for me in my youth, like I couldn't have overeaten because I was just too active. But then something happens in our 20s and 30s when we start to become less active, but yet our volume, our intake is still pretty high. And then we're making bad choices because we're always on the run and go. And, quick meals. And so our foods aren't as high quality or homemade as they should be. And we're eating more calories than we think we are, just because it's a very hard it's a very hard thing to navigate in this day and age. It really is. It was easier, I think, a long time ago because the options were fewer for bad food.
We also knew, right? Like, you grew up in a house where you were not allowed to eat that second dessert because it wasn't good
Yep.
for you. But you can walk into a coffee shop now and have $1,000 calorie beverage, right?
Yes.
That's insane, right?
Yes. And it doesn't satisfy you necessarily like an 1,000-calorie meal would.
Right. That's right. Yeah. I will say I can't sit and brag about this really, but my mom in her infinite wisdom when we were kids just always cooked very healthy. We didn't have a lot of money, but she cooked very healthy. And as an adult, I think the last time I ate at a McDonald's or a Burger King or anything like that, I was like 22, 23 years old.
Oh, wow. Good for you.
Yeah, I kind of lost a taste for it,
Mhm.
And so even like when my son was born, I was 30, he wanted to go to McDonald's, took him to McDonald's, but I just never ate there. I'd sit with him while he ate and go home and eat dinner. And now it's funny, he's the same way. Like he's in his mid-20s and he doesn't eat fast food.
Yeah. Funny. I mean, I can't say that. Well, there's only a few, like we'll hit a Chick-fil-A, on a night where we don't feel like cooking, or obviously have pizza delivered or something at the house.
So
That's, but I have been better about, in the last, I don't know, 5+ years, just kind of stopping any of the fast food, business. I'd rather make a burger at home, frankly, anyway, because there's so much so much better and tastier and healthier.
I'm not saying I avoid a burger. I'll eat that every once in a while. I also love a good pizza, right? But, from a mom and pop around the Boston area, not from a Domino's, right?
Yeah.
Pizza.
Yeah.
Great, so.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Something else that I've, struggled with, but something I've thought about that's bothered me over the last 20 to 30 years from what I can tell. And I'm not in all the school systems, throughout our country. I'm only familiar, obviously, with the school systems that I've seen my children through. But I feel like there's and maybe it's gotten a little bit better recently, but I feel like there was a lack, certainly in the 90s and early 2000s, a lack of emphasis on physical education and physical activity in elementary, junior high school, and even in the high school, even with things like recess.
Yep.
And I always found that to be a highly valuable part of the day for children because they need a physical release, and to have them sitting still for 6 to 8 hours at a time does not seem smart to me. And you got these educated people that are highly intelligent, yet they're frustrated that the kid won't sit still in his seat. And it's like, well, what do you expect? They're 7. They need time to go outside and run around for a little while. They should have 2 recesses.
So, yeah. I mean, I think one easy thing to say to you is that we expect things of children that we can't do ourselves. Right. I mean,
right.
I'm sure if I went back and watched this video, it would be nuts to see how much I fidget around my chair. I'm not a gum chewer, but chewing gum actually has been related to increasing attention in some cases, right? Just this idea of taking micro breaks. I mean, I sit at my desk a lot more than I probably should. I get tired, and sometimes I'll get up and take a walk through the halls of my building. Other times I'm going to sit and I'm going to take a look at ESPN or follow a couple of my favorite teams or whatever it is, and take these micro breaks. But we expect children to sit in a chair 6-7 hours at a very young age, 2 feet on the ground, no fidgeting, paying attention to teacher. And what do? We've taken away, movement, basically, be it physical education or recess, which have similar and separate importance to their lives.
Yeah.
Taken away music, we've taken away the arts. We've taken away all the things that allow kids to be, creative and improve in their lives and in their schooling away from the classroom.
Yeah.
What's nuts to me is that if you go look through the entire literature, and I've written reviews about this. If you go look through the entire literature on the relationship between physical activity and academic outcomes, there are 2 conclusions. Okay. One is that more physical active kids or more fit kids or whatever, more kids who exercise more, however you want to classify that, they perform better in school. Okay. Now, I'm not saying it's causal, but there's a relationship there. The other is that there's no relationship whatsoever. So the more active or the less active you are, there's no relationship. That's also a win, because what you have is you have a more physically active child at no cost to educational attainment. So nowhere in the literature is anyone reporting that more time spent being physically active is relating to lesser academic outcomes.
Right. Correct.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
So the reason for this is a number of things. There's been cutbacks, right? School districts are forced to deal with more students than ever before for a classroom. Bush's No Child Left Behind wasn't helpful to us in the early 2000s, but we survived it. And in some regards, it was kind of a bit of a rallying call at the time. And we have kind of schools have relied less on specialists, and so now it's budget cuts lead to who goes first? Physical education teacher, right? Who teaches PE? The homeroom teacher, if they care to, right? What do? They roll out the balls and say, go at it, right? Which is not what physical education is. Beyond the health benefit, physical education is important to us because it teaches us efficacy for being physically active throughout our lives. How many people say, I don't like to run? Well, great. I don't either. I haven't run since I was in my early 30s, right? I don't run, but I found a number of other things I like to do. And that's because I was exposed to a lot of different options as a kid.
Yeah.
And had the efficacy to then say, I can be a physically active individual and I want to go do this.
Wow.
So,
well, I'm happy to hear that's your thinking about it as well. A little bit of frustration, I'm sure. And that's, I'm sure there's a lot of other educators like yourself who have been around the block for the last, 2-3 decades. And it's just kind of an unfortunate side effect of funding and other things. But I'm sure if you asked anybody directly and said, is physical education, physical activity important to child development, complete kind of thorough development, I think anybody would say, of course.
Yeah.
Just as art is, just as chorus or some of these. I loved all that stuff as a kid. I loved art class. I loved PE or gym. I loved it. I loved doing chorus, special chorus. I loved all that stuff because I was kind of I was an active kid, but I was also kind of a performer. And so it really worked well for my personality. But I would just encourage anybody listening, do whatever you can. If your kid is not getting the activity in school, then you have to look for other opportunities outside of school that get your kid moving.
But that's absolutely right, Chris. I mean, that's how my kid was raised. I mean, I didn't rely on the school to make for his physical activity behavior. And in fact, I served in an Institute of Medicine committee where the conclusion was that schools should be responsible for half of their daily physical activity intake, right? So if, the physical activity guidelines, which I also serve that, the physical activity guidelines for Americans in 2018 came out and said that kids should have 60 minutes or more of moderate to vigorous physical activity every day. And the Institute of Medicine committee said that okay, great. The school should be responsible for 30 minutes of that. And, who knows if they are or not. I think it's school to school or school district to school district. I will tell you that some of the most fit countries in the world, like Denmark, they have daily PE, right? It's mandatory in all schools that they have 60 minutes of daily physical education or physical activity time, right?
Yeah.
Other countries understand this more than we do.
No, 100%. And I mean, I talked to my neighbors who have done quite a bit of traveling in Europe over the recent years. Just talk about just how much more active in daily lives people are in a lot of these European countries because people are on their feet. They're walking everywhere.
Right.
They're not using transportation as much as we are here in the States. We rely heavily on, getting on something to move us rather than using our own two legs. And walking, the simplest form of activity, is sometimes the best thing that you can do because you can do it forever.
Yeah. I walk to the train every day. It was funny. I was telling someone, I bought an old sports car. It's 20 years old, thinking this would be great. I put 1,000 miles on it last year.
Not getting a lot of use.
No, because I walk to and from the train. I take the train to the city. And if I go out with my friends in my spare time, whatever, I end up at a bar. I'm not driving home, right? So I almost never drive the thing.
Wow.
So
Wow.
might get
That's
rid of it.
nice.
Might be time to
Yeah.
get rid of it. So.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I I know what I see, and when I see people out walking, they typically have a smile on their face, and there's a pep in their step, and I know they're making it a priority. They know it's good for them, and it makes them feel better, and that's why having dogs or stuff like that can be such a huge advantage, because they need to walk, and people love their animals so much they're going to go out of their way to take care of their animal, and side effect, they take care of themselves a little bit too.
Absolutely.
So I'm a huge animal guy myself, so I walk my dogs just about every single day. Awesome. Sometimes twice. I am fascinated. In my talk, I talked about the hippocampus, and you've done quite a bit of work there. The area of our brain in the limbic system, the hippocampus is part of that, responsible for memory and for learning, for emotions, lots of things, and our short-term and long-term memories. Can you talk a little bit about what you have seen in your work with how movement of the body impacts this very important part of our brain?
Yeah. So let me step back, Chris, and say that I my work early on investigated a lot of different areas of brain and cognition, and 25 years later, there's sort of two aspects of cognition that appear to be disproportionately benefited by physical activity. One is hippocampal dependent memory. So we do have memories that occur outside the hippocampus. So hippocampal dependent memory, and the other is prefrontal functions, right? Executive functions. And so those two areas have really been what I've honed in and targeted for more than a decade now because of that. In terms of the hippocampus, as you said, it's a subcortical structure. This is a very well-developed structure, not just in humans, but it's among the most developed structures, like in rodents and and other mammals that don't have as large of a prefrontal cortex, and it's involved in learning and memory. And so, in the case of humans, it's pretty straightforward. When we make relationships about things, the hippocampus comes online. So if you see a pencil in front of you and say, and you remember, oh, my pencil's on my desk. Okay, that's not necessarily a hippocampal function. But if you say, when I was talking to Chuck, he had this really cool wooden pen, right? You might one day happen into a store and find a wooden pen and say, aha, I remember where I saw that. Chuck had that wooden pen, right? So you've formed a relationship between me and the wooden pen. And so that is an instance where hippocampus comes online, and it's a dependent form of memory. Super important for animals, right? Like, because when you're that cute and fluffy rodent or a cute and fluffy bunny, let's say, which I guess is also a rodent, right? I think so. I don't know. I don't study animals.
It's in that family.
Yeah,
Anyway.
it's somewhere around there, right?
Fluffy and small. Yeah.
Yeah, they gotta bounce around. They gotta know where food is. They gotta remember where it's safe to be, like where their house is. They gotta remember where the other cute and fluffy rodents are, because they want to procreate. They got to remember where, they got to remember where the predators are, or where they may be, because they don't want to be hot lunch themselves, right? So I mean, the hippocampus manages all of that. They're learning their environment. They're forming memories around that environment, and that leads them to longevity, right? And so, what it turns out. Let me just back up and say one more thing. The hippocampus is one of two brain regions that creates new neurons throughout your entire life. Okay. Wow. So it's an important structure to keep healthy. And for whatever reason, physical activity, well, I mean, we know some of why. Physical activity is disproportionately and at times selectively beneficial for the hippocampus. It means that the hippocampus is more amenable to physical activity intervention. And so when you strengthen that piece of tissue and the networks associated with that tissue, I think it's incorrect just to talk about tissue now, what we know about the brain in sort of isolation. It's part of bigger structures and networks and traffic and all that good stuff. And so, when those areas of the brain are amenable to physical activity, well, the functions that they support are also amenable. And so I think we have a couple of studies on hippocampus, but the one that captures a lot of attention is that we take kids, we put them in the magnet and the MRI, and we measured the structures of the hippocampus in this particular case, we showed that higher fit kids had greater volume, more hippocampus, bigger amount, and bilaterally, so hippocampi.
So size matters with the
In
hippocampus.
some cases, it does. And what we then found was that that when we gave them two memory tests outside the magnet, one that was hippocampal dependent and one that was hippocampal independent, what we found was that higher fit kids were selectively better at the hippocampal dependent memories, not independent, where there's no effect whether they're high or low fit. But what was really interesting is that the size of the hippocampus mediated that relationship, meaning that higher fitness was related to bigger hippocampus, and bigger hippocampus is related to better memory, hippocampal dependent memory. And so, we were able to show this nice triangulation of fitness to brain volume in a certain area to cognitive performance.
And am I right in saying that when you have developed the hippocampal part of the brain with a lot of activities, hand-eye coordinated stuff like, maybe tennis or anything racket related, would that be something that is easier to hold on to as you age? Like in terms of your ability would maybe be, you're able to maintain it at maybe a higher level than maybe somebody else who maybe never did much of that and was trying to develop it later on in life.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Again, I don't know. It would be an interesting experiment, right? To look into that. Off the top of my head, there's probably a couple other areas of the brain that are pretty important, or networks. Basal ganglia, we've showed similar relationships between being physically active or being more fit and basal ganglia. Basal ganglia is a number of subcortical structures, but only in the ones that are related to so the basal ganglia as a whole is at the interplay of like cognition and action, right? And so we're looking at like where executive functions, part of that executive function subcortical network. And so some of the basal ganglia is involved in that, some of it's not involved in other things like reward and emotion and things like that. And because it's at the sort of the crux of cognition action, I consider the basal ganglia would also be an important structure in your scenario of like learning racket sports. As with executive function, the ability, prefrontal cortex and that network, because that's the ability to understand movement. And if you've been physically active, you understand movement, right? So when I grew up, I played baseball, like most boys who played sports around, in my era. You ever try and hit a cricket ball? Hit a ball in cricket. I can't, with a wicket, and I can't remember a bowl or,
I've seen cricket. I've never played it. It seems even more difficult than baseball.
Yeah. But, one time I've gotten to swing a cricket bat, or what is it? A wicket? I think a cricket wicket. I don't know. I think my Australian buddies would make fun of me right now. But, I was actually able to hit the ball, right? And I developed hand-eye from another sport. There's transfer, right? And there's probably some truth to tennis. I've had a million people tell me that I'd be a great golfer because I played so much hockey, So I think these transfer moments, but I'll tell you, I don't think I could hit it. I don't think I'd be very good at playing tennis. I've never really played racket sports in my life. I don't have that efficacy for a racket sport. It's a different stroke, right? There's just a lot to it that's very different. I bet I'd pick it up better than someone who only ran in their lives, right? Only like marathon runners or
100%.
But maybe not to the level of, say, if you played squash or tennis, maybe you'd be a better, what's the sport that everyone plays right now? Paddleball or whatever, right?
Oh, pickleball has blown up. In fact, we did, just a few months ago, we had one of our quarterly planning meetings where all of our team kind of comes together for a week, and we have meetings, and then we have a fun day. And we went to a local in Tampa here, a local pickleball center. That's a big, huge area with courts everywhere. I don't know. It must have 20 courts at this thing. Hugely. And all of them were busy. And this is middle of the day on a Thursday. And the place is packed with people who, I don't know,
Yep.
took the day off, or it's their lunch break, or they're retired, or whatever it is. But it was the busiest place going, and we had a blast.
I mean, I've the good side is I've heard that's everywhere, particularly with older adults.
Yes.
And in fact, one of the anchors at a mall here in Boston, outside Boston, shut down, and it's become indoor pickleball courts, like with
I'm sure.
and all kinds of stuff.
Oh, I'm sure and I'm sure it's doing great, because this sport has exploded. Because there's this tennis is a pretty popular sport in this country. It is globally, but it's pretty big, especially down here in Florida. I was actually the GM of a tennis and fitness center for several years, and we had 7 tennis courts at the facility I managed, and I played tennis every week. So I have a real love for tennis, always have. So pickleball felt like just as a natural. There are differences to it, certainly. The ball, the paddle, the size of the court, the area you can't hit the ball into on the serve. All these there's different elements, but there's a lot of similarity. And I very quickly just became a pickleball player. Like it wasn't a stretch, too much of a stretch for me. But I love, and my son is a baseball player, but I love that he loves racket sports. We play badminton a lot at home. We have a little mobile badminton net that we can set up in the road and just play out in front of the house. And he's quite good at it. But I feel like, geez, that transfers over very well to baseball, or to any in terms of hand-eye coordination, and will serve him well, as will most crossover sports. If you're good at one thing, do other sports, because they will benefit you in that other sport. Everything kind of has that transfer and that benefit.
Yeah, and I think how we train, I mean, this is the cross-training piece of it, right? I mean, one of the problems with American youth sport now is that we had specialized so early. I mean, I've lamented, my son got really good at hockey when he was a little too young almost, right? Because he had to give up baseball to play hockey in the dead of summer, right?
Yep.
And, he's on traveling teams, and, we're carting him all across the U.S. to play and things like that, up into Canada. And, and so I actually found for a while some track and field, because that was a way to cross train on days, private coach who could just work on his mechanics of running and lifting and all those things. But that guy eventually moved away, and there wasn't anyone else who I felt was actually worth his time. And in the small town we were in, but I actually came across a boxing gym. My dad was a boxer in his youth. And what's amazing about it is I couldn't pick another sport that trained footwork and hand speed, two things you need in hockey. Right. And I actually think, and my kid's tall, he's 6'6" now. I mean, he was a tall 10-year-old. He was a tall 12-year-old, and he'd get a hold of his feet and his body, and he'd start to skate really well. And then he'd grow an inch, and all of a sudden it was like starting over for 6 months. And I was blown away by how well he was able to train his feet and his hands from boxing, and how much that applied to his hockey game.
Wow. And I would never think that, but as you talk about it, it makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. I would have done it.
Footwork is everything for a boxer.
Oh, everything. I mean, that was, they're tying your laces together. You have 1 foot in a tire, 1 foot out of a tire. I mean, the stuff they did and the transfer, I didn't even have to talk about it with them. I just watch it happen, Wow. I stayed out of the way.
Wow. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Well, I encourage anyone listening right now. It's a great lesson. Don't become one dimensional. Don't let your kid become one dimensional with the sport he or she is doing. It. Let them participate in other things, because getting a break from one sport to participate in another one, then coming back to it, well, you'll probably actually they won't have backtracked. You'd probably end up improving. Or at accelerated level, because of things just have that way of having so many benefits. So getting back to one other area that I wanted to talk about, because it's something that I feel is really important to our listeners, is I know there's people that when they're in their 30s and 40s and 50s, when they're having children, and they can no longer really be selfish. Mm-hmm. It's a time of life, a season of life, where we have to devote a lot of our time, as you did, Chuck, to your son And sometimes we do a bad job of taking care of our own physical needs.
Yeah, sure.
And so we kind of put those things away maybe for 20 years. And it can be very daunting to people to come back to it. But I wanted to assure people listening that the body and the brain are pretty miraculous in terms of when you get back into something, how they can rebound and how they can really get back to a place and even surpass maybe where you were, even though that you're older. Whereas people sometimes just feel like, well, why even try? Why even give it my effort? I'm old now. That's behind me. It's not, that's an old hobby. That's an old activity. That's for young people. But I really want people to realize that that's not, it's the exact opposite, is that the movement of the body is what keeps us young or makes us young. And I just wanted to kind of hit on that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, Chris, you're absolutely right. It's, I get to play in a hockey game where there's guys that are in their very early 70s that are still playing. And, I play with one who, I still can't get around them.
Get out of here. And he's 70 something?
71, I think. Yeah. He's just, because, he laments that he can't move like he did when he was a kid and played college hockey and all that kind of stuff. But you know what? He's so smart. He understands the game. He's got that hockey IQ, and I just can't get around him. I mean, occasionally I beat him, but he beats me more than I beat him, when I'm attacking. And I really, I really believe that, like, if you want to keep yourself young, sure, you can keep yourself young by being physically active a lot of different ways. But if you love something, like if you love hockey, you go home, you watch hockey, right? You come to the rink and you have goals for yourself and you want to do this and you're motivated. And those things keep you young also, right? They keep you wanting, they keep you striving.
Yeah.
And, and I would say while you're, I coached hockey for a lot of years when my kid was coming up, and that's one way to stay active, right? I mean, I was not always an empty nester where I get to go home and exercise every day or wake up early on Saturday and go exercise. And there were days where I'd go from the office to the rink. I'd have my kid and his team on the ice, and then I'll go back to the office. And, it was convenient for me. It was all on the same campus. But what's important about it is that you find ways to be active. So I could coach and go out and demo and be on my feet and whatnot. But, I would see the average, mom or dad would pick up and drop off and pick up their kid. But there were a couple of them that would power walk around the ice for the entire hour we were on the ice, right?
Yep.
So you find ways to build it into your life, and if you can't build it in for an hour like that, and most kids play soccer or baseball or what have you, there's no reason why you're not walking around the field during that practice.
That's right.
Put your earbuds in, save a work call for that time, listen to music, do whatever podcast, whatever it is, you can do it during this time, right? If you don't have that kind of time, well, build it into your life, right? Don't drive. Or if you have to drive, don't park as close as possible. Go park as far as possible from your office or from the, the supermarket or whatever it is. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah.
The stairs.
And you won't get dings on your car from the shopping carts or someone parking too close to you. If you park further away, no one's out there anyway.
There you go.
You get double benefit.
There you go. Right. Yeah.
You get the extra walking and the less scratches on your vehicle. No, I mean, I wanted to drive home that point of if anything, ramp up your physical activity, find a way to be more active when you're older. And I just know when I was surrounded by so many men and women 60, 70 plus, when I was managing the tennis and fitness center and working with adults one-on-one, that it gave them such meaning and purpose and increased independence. And when you can do things for yourself later in life, there's a pride a healthy pride that you have about yourself and your life, that you're not requiring other people to do so much for you that you can still do for yourself. And that's in large part due to movement and daily activity and hobbies and getting back to doing things you loved when you were young. I mean, you love hockey from when you were a young person, and here you are still doing it. and loving it and still getting beat by a guy older than you and he, being inspired. And so, no day soon will you be giving that up.
No, definitely not. I'd also say it's important that, you think about it from the direction of, it gives you a way to communicate with your kids too, right? You can, to be physically active as a family is great, right? There's, you're an important role model in that case. I mean, it's very clear my physical activity behaviors are those of my father, right? And, I hope that those get passed on to my kid over time too, right?
Yeah. Wow.
And to do it together, it's family time, right?
Yeah.
And it's something you can do with your spouse. I mean, my wife and I, we don't do any physical activity together till we moved back home to Boston. And now we hike together up in New Hampshire and places like that.
Oh, that's great.
We tried to hike different. I've had to slow down, speed up a little. I have longer legs, but we get there.
It's funny you say that because that's my other favorite activity is hiking. Family trips and, down here in Florida, going to the mountains for us is North Georgia, North Carolina. And we just love it. And we do, with the kids and finding new trails to explore and bringing our dogs. And it's so much fun. And you're in nature, getting fresh air and sunshine, and hiking is, from all the research I've done, is one of the best things that you can do for yourself from a physical standpoint, but a cognitive standpoint. It releases all the feel-good chemicals in the brain. When you're navigating a trail and you're having to move your body and decide how you're going to step, every step is kind of a targeted. You're not walking on a sidewalk. It's very different for your brain to navigate a trail that's up and down and sideways and slantways. And I just love it, and it's just such a benefit. To me, the ideal vacation is a cabin in the woods with access to different trails and hiking and stuff like that. For me, that's an awesome trip.
Well, you should take your next family vacation in the White Mountains in New Hampshire.
I've been. So you don't know this because we didn't talk about it. I grew up in Connecticut.
Oh,
yeah. I lived there until 2002, and one of the last trips I did, like wintry fun trips, was we went up and skied. Was the White Mountains?
Yeah. So,
what's the scary drop? What's that called?
Tuckerman's?
Yeah. So we hiked all the way up to that. Okay. I'm with guys who were like pro level skiers. I wasn't that much of a skier growing up, but I dabbled. So these young guys that I was with, they younger than a couple years younger than me, but whatever. So we hike all the way up. The only way to get there is a hike. There's not there's no lift. You have to hike your way up to the top of Tuckerman's Ravine. And I got about halfway up and then dropped in about halfway up, maybe a little bit more than half, where some of these guys, they went right to the top. It was a windy, crazy day, and they still did it and dropped in. But I'll tell you, man, that scared the heck out of me. Like, it's not for the faint of heart.
No, it's a 100-foot drop. People die. People died on it last year. So actually, it's funny. I have a cabin that's maybe 2 miles from Tuckerman's Ravine.
Oh my goodness!
But it's directly across the street. So Tuckerman's Ravine's on the way up to Mount Washington, right? It's part of the whole trail. But right across the street is Square Ledge, and that's like a 15-minute hike to the most beautiful view of Tuckerman's. And
oh wow!
I'll sit up there really. Last week, this week, about this time of year, because the way the sun hits, that's the last place in New Hampshire that really has snow. So people do a lot of spring skiing there once all the winds have died down. But I'll sit on Square Ledge and just watch people drop down out of that.
Oh my goodness!
I'll never ski that.
It was frightening, and that's why I say I got about halfway up. I mean, because you're literally you have crampons, like the thing that you're on your ski boot, and you're kicking into this crazy. I don't know what the degree of angle. It's very steep.
Yes.
And I just said, I'm not going any higher. I'm going to break my neck and, let these guys, some of these guys are fearless and really obviously high level skiers to be able to just go up, drop in and get down to the bottom and be like, that was fun.
Yeah.
Like no big deal.
Yeah.
But, man, what a trip that was years ago. Well, this has been just a joy for me, just thank you for sharing your passion and your expertise. And I know this is a benefit to our listeners and hopefully inspiring them to move, to find something to do in life physically so that they can kind of keep their bodies young and their brains functioning at a high level for as long as possible. Thank you for all of your work, Chuck, that you've done over the decades, and I'm sure inspiring just hundreds, if not thousands, of students with all the work that you've done and making time to be on the show today.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate you invited me on your time today. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Oh, yeah. It's been an absolute joy. Thank you, listeners, for joining the Strong by Design podcast. Again, please go ahead, leave a rating or a review anywhere where you're downloading the show. We encourage you to share this episode with friends or family members who maybe need a little bit of inspiration to move more in life and to keep their brains functioning at a high level. And we're just so encouraged by you, and thank you for coming back every single week and enjoying the show. We'll talk to you again really soon. God bless.
Thank you so much for listening to the Strong by Design podcast. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe so that more people can find out about our show. Plus, you don't want to miss any future episodes with the amazing guests and topics we have lined up for you.